Hi, and thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking about how you can create the bubble map that goes with your MyStar units and how you can do this in the remote setting. So thank you for joining and giving your time. I'm going to go through some different activities here so that we can take individual models, we can have them form small groups, and then we can have a whole group discussion and come up with a consensus about questions that we think need to be answered to be able to complete the unit challenge. Okay, the very first thing that I would do is to make sure that students can access the slides. It's important that students have editing rights when they're using Google Slides because they will need to type and interact with your slide deck. So I'm going to go ahead and check the sharings really quickly to make sure that my students can all have access. So I want to check the link, and it says that anyone with the link can be an editor. So I am done with my settings. I know that my kids can access, and I'm going to copy the link. And then I would go ahead and share that with them. I can put it in the chat on Zoom. I could email it to them, or depending on the ILS system that you're using, we use Google Classroom in my district, so I would post it in Google Classroom as well. So they have many places that they can access the slide deck. So once they're in, I would go ahead and direct them to slide 3. And you can see here that this is an independent activity. Teresa Wills is a great resource. She has templates that she's created that are free and that you can edit and make them your own. And it saves a lot of time using her materials. So this is an independent activity. I always make these slides orange so that my students know what's coming up. So the first part of their independent work is to read the unit challenge that describes Becky and Joe. Becky and Joe are siblings that have a question about the inheritance of traits, and it is the bubble map that I would use with students to develop for lesson 7.6. You can see that it is linked on the slide so students can click and open. I could also post it in Google Classroom. And in addition, we've included a video that reads the unit challenge to students depending on those that need it. After they've read, we've then asked them to create an initial model that's their own that shows how they think Joe and Becky might share traits, but not all of them. And they can do this on a piece of paper just so they have a chance to go through the information and process it on their own. And they have something that's concrete that they can share once they go into breakout rooms, which is the next step. So if you look at the slide deck, we are now looking at slide 4. Again, the template for a breakout room that lets students know that they'll be joining a group is blue in my world. So the directions on here are to join the team in the breakout room, which I would set up through Zoom. Because we use Zoom, but if you have another system that you use with your students when you meet remotely with them, by all means use that. One of the class rules that we established together in an earlier session is that students are having their mics on. If their technology supports, I would recommend the cameras on as well, but again, that policy might be determined by your district. The next set of instructions are for them to click the Jamboard link to open up the boards. Jamboard is a Google add-on. It is free, and it provides a whiteboard space for students to work. They would work on those boards, and you as the instructor will have access to those boards, and you can bring them back out at a later date if they need to change their model as they go. So here's the Jamboard link. I've put it here, and I've also done it here so students have a couple of places to click. And then the rest of the instructions here just say to scroll to the board that matches your room number. So if I'm breakout room 3, I'm looking for board 3, and to complete the activity on the slide. So what I would do with my students is I would have them open up the link to the Jamboard. And these will be some student samples that you'll see here. So you'll notice that this team, and I put the directions on here. So develop an initial model showing how siblings like Joe and Becky have many inherited traits in common, but not all. So here's where students could take their individual models that they started, and they can share them with their team. There are a lot of tools in Jamboard that students can use, including different colors of pens and highlighters. There are different colors of sticky notes. And depending on your teaching style, you could assign students to be particular sticky notes so that you know that all students are working on the board. It's the same philosophy as giving each kid a marker and a whiteboard on the whiteboard, and that they're responsible for that color on the board. So that is another idea. Here they can add images from their computer or from the web. There's an opportunity to put shapes on here. They can fill the shapes, they can color the shapes. There's text boxes, and then a presenting tool is a laser, which they can access as well. So you can see, I'll scroll through the slides for you, that there are a lot of different ideas and ways to put these initial models together. This was the first time that we did modeling together. Even though it's 7-6, this is the unit that my district decided to start with. And so there's a lot of different ways that students think they needed to put a model together. And that's okay. We can clean that up as we go. This group decided to use a Venn diagram. This group decided to use sort of a family tree idea. This group, again, they did the Venn diagram. And then they had an arrow and pieces down here. So, and then this would be an example of creating just extra slides for students. This is how it looked before they started putting everything on there. Students can see other kids' Jamboards. They can scroll through. You can scroll through as the teacher. And it's kind of helpful because I am going to have the kids interacting with the Jamboards in just a minute. One thing to point out is that you do need to set your sharing settings just like you do on Google Docs, that the students have access to the slide deck and that they can edit. Okay, so here's the next part. They've made their individual boards. They've worked with a team to develop their own Jamboards. And then I would close up the breakout rooms and bring them back to the main session. And to start discussion about what the boards were showing, I would put the slide up and I would ask the students these prompts. Are the models completely correct and accurate? And what questions do you need answers to? So they would look back through the slides, and with their group, they would record their questions that they still have on the space that I've given them for their group. And I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. Slide 6 and slide 7, I've given the groups different spots to type. So they're only going into the Jamboards. They're not going back into breakout rooms. So they would have 2 tabs open. And then you could put them back into breakout rooms if you wanted them to talk, but you don't have to. There's a spot for each of the groups to type. And you can see that I've created a second set for the rest of my groups. So now that students have had a chance to look through the models and ask questions and what they think still needs to be answered, this is where I would start as the teacher to guide instruction. I would use my teacher talk moves. I would ask students to find patterns or commonalities or questions that appear in a lot of groups' spaces. And I would probably elect a student to do typing and just type. What are some questions that we're seeing and that we agree need to be answered? And I would have them typed on this board. One idea that you could do is that you could create shapes, and after all of your questions are listed, you could have students vote. Which questions do they feel are most important? And you can use the shapes, and they can slide the shapes over to vote for the ones that they think are most important or need to be answered. So I can, if I had this question here and I can see that it's got 6 hearts next to it, then that's probably something that needs to stay. So that's a way to do voting. And then as the teacher, then I would collect or analyze the votes, and I would type the questions out. And then from here on out, in the slide decks that I create for the following lessons, I would make sure that I copied this slide and I pasted it at the beginning of each slide deck. And I can use a highlighter or a different tool to show questions that we've already answered. Students know that we could add additional questions to the board as they come up through the lessons. So the final thing that I would do, just maybe as an exit ticket, is to pretend that your friend was absent from class today. Write what you would say if you had to explain the lesson to your friend. That's just an exit ticket idea. They could put text boxes on here. They could include that in a chat. There's a lot of different ways that you can have them summarize. But basically, that's it. So that is how you can use Google Slides and Jamboard and Breakout Rooms to have students interact and create a remote bubble map for a unit. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk soon.